Well, good afternoon. My name is Larry Galizio, and I'm the President and CEO of the Community College League of California. And thank you for being here this afternoon for our Proposition 15 Town Hall meeting. I will be your host, and we're very pleased this afternoon to be joined by a prestigious panel to discuss Proposition 15. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a couple of notes about how we are going to be running this town hall. So as you can see, the chat function has been disabled. However, if you do have a question, we encourage you to use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. The webinar recording and all the PowerPoint slide decks will be emailed out to everyone who registered as a participant. So as we wait a minute or two for others to join, we are requesting that you would please fill out our very short 3-question poll to help us get started. So with that, here is the poll, and we'll take a couple of minutes to answer those questions. Thank you. So thank you for participating in that poll. We will be sharing the results of the poll very shortly. Just as I said that, there you see it. So again, thank you for participating. It's very good that we have 98% registered to vote in the upcoming election. And we certainly hope you participate. The League believes strongly in civic engagement and participation, as you would imagine by the fact that we're hosting this town hall. So you can see that we have, I think, a good diversity in this audience. So excited to see that. So now I'd like to provide a little bit of an overview of the agenda for this next 50 minutes or so. So we are very pleased to be joined by Senator Connie Leyva, who I will be introducing shortly. We also have a spokesperson from the Proposition 15 campaign. There will be an opportunity to ask the Proposition 15 campaign representative some questions and responses. And then also, we always want and try to foreground the student perspective. Students are so critical to this election, and of course, as community colleges, we always advocate for them to be participating. So we'll have a student Senate representative, and then a sort of a call to action. We also want to go over some of the restrictions for the use of public resources and sort of what you can and cannot do should you work at a college or a public institution. So we're also going to be doing that. So without a further ado, I'd like to introduce, it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Connie Leyva. So as you can see, so I grew up in Southern California, and I can tell you, this is a very, very diverse district that Senator Leyva has. Senator Leyva, Connie Leyva, has represented the 20th State Senate District since 2014. This is her second term in the State Senate. As you can see, the district includes cities such as Colton, Fontana, San Bernardino, Rialto, Pomona, Ontario, and others. Importantly, Senator Leyva is the chair of the Senate Education Committee. She's also California Legislative Women's Caucus and Senate Democrat Caucus chair as well. She also serves on the budget subcommittee #1 on education, one that we know quite well. Very important for community colleges. Prior to Senator Leyva's election to the state Senate, she served as both a union representative and president of the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 1428. She was also elected in 2004 as the first woman president of the California Labor Federation, representing, more than 2.1 million workers throughout California. Senator Leyva and her husband Al live in Chino, and they're proud parents of twin adult daughters. So without further ado, Senator Leyva, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you to the Community College League of California for hosting this and putting this on. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. I don't know if there's anything more important than Proposition 15 for the state of California. We know that the presidential election is critically important for California and the country, but Proposition 15 is critically important. As you heard Larry say, I am the proud chair of Senate Education. Our children are our future, but I always say we have to stop telling them that they're our future if we do not fully fund education. And it's not just K through 12, it's our community colleges. I have a very soft spot in my heart for community colleges. I started at a community college, Mount San Antonio, when I graduated from high school in 1985. And I always say that I had my best class, an English class, when I was at Mount San Antonio College, Mount SAC. So why is Proposition so important? So before COVID, we had some issues with funding. And now after COVID, we have incredible issues with funding in the state of California and especially with education. Proposition 15 will give us $9 billion additional dollars in California for education. It could not come at a more important time. Proposition 15 is also generational. We don't know that we'll ever have this opportunity again to do this. So seems easy, right? Seems like we should be able to get everybody on board for Proposition 15. You know you have a proposition or an issue that threatens the very existence of large corporations when they start hitting back so hard and just flat out lying. Proposition 15 will protect homeowners, it'll protect renters, it even protects our small businesses by giving them a tax cut. I'm sure you've all seen the commercials on TV that say exactly the opposite. So what we need is we need not only all of you to vote for Proposition 15, we need you to talk to your family, your friends, your neighbors. Even that neighbor who seems like they might not want to listen to what you have to say, you have to have those hard conversations. Get your mask on, get out there and talk to folks, call people, join a phone bank or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, because this will be life-changing for our students in California. And you know what? All we're asking people to do is pay their fair share. Does that seem wrong? I don't think that seems wrong. I don't mind paying my taxes, but corporations and companies like Disneyland, who are paying the old tax rate of when they bought that property, should be paying what all of us are paying fairly. So let's get out, let's vote for Proposition 15, and let's debunk all of those rumors. It protects small businesses by giving them a tax cut. How often does that happen? That doesn't happen very often. It raises $9 billion for our schools and our community colleges, and it doesn't harm homeowners or renters. My mom and dad live in a house here in Chino, and they fall under Proposition 13. I would not be encouraging anyone to do anything that would harm them and harm what they pay and their tax rate. So let's do this. It's our opportunity. It's our moment. We can make something really worthwhile come out of COVID. So thank you for having me today. Thank you all for being interested. Larry, thank you again for having me, and to the Community College League of California for putting this on. Let's do this.
Well, thank you, Senator Leyva. We know you're extraordinarily busy these days, and we know you have an incredibly diverse district. So for you to come out so strongly on this, and we know you've thought about this a great deal. So we do appreciate it. And we also know that you are a strong believer in the community colleges, and you've shown that throughout your career. So we're grateful. And we also know that you really want the students of the community colleges throughout the state to come out in force, and this will impact them a great deal. So thank you again. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you in the coming days.
You bet. Thank you, Larry. Thanks, everybody. And yes, students, this is how you make your voices heard. Thanks, Larry.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Wonderful. So now I'd like to introduce Ms. Veronica Carrizales, who is the Policy and Campaign Development Director of California Calls, which is a very powerful alliance of 31 grassroots community-based organizations in 12 counties around the state. Veronica spearheads and coordinates policy analysis and coalition building for California Calls, including the Prop 15 campaign to significantly increase funding for public schools, community colleges, and local services. Veronica is a first-generation Chicana from the Coachella Valley with 9 siblings in a farm worker family. Veronica currently serves on the board of directors for the California Budget and Policy Center and also the Human Impact Partners. It's my great pleasure to turn it over to Veronica Carrizales. Veronica?
Great. Thank you, Larry. And thank you to the Community College League for this opportunity to talk about such an important measure that is going to be on the ballot in November. Just a quick, since Connie, Senator Leyva was sharing her community college credentials, I'm going to do the same. I also went to a community college, College of the Desert in Palm Desert in the Coachella Valley. So I was a student senator there. So I'm also a community college alum, and I recognize how critical and how important they are to our communities. So with your support, this November, we are going to make history in California by putting an end to 42 years of disinvestment that have benefited wealthy corporations, and we're going to put our schools and our communities first. And we're going to do this by passing Prop 15. Next slide. So what does Prop 15 do? Prop 15 will help us reclaim $12 billion for our schools and communities by closing a property tax loophole that has benefited large corporations. It does this by requiring the reassessment of commercial industrial properties at fair market value while maintaining protections for homeowners, for renters, and for agriculture. And this is important, folks, because people have asked, well, I live in an apartment, technically that's zoned as commercial. All residential property, whether there are hotels that have been converted into housing for the homeless, whether it's mobile homes, whether it's apartments, anything that's used as residential will be exempt. Another important thing is that, our measure helps small businesses with properties that are valued under $3 million. They will not be impacted. It provides the single largest tax cut to small businesses by eliminating the tax on business equipment and fixtures. And moreover, our measure mandates transparency and accountability and annual reporting. Next slide. So who pays? The largest commercial property owners in the state of California will pay. 10% of the wealthiest commercial properties generate 92% of the $12 billion revenue that I mentioned earlier. These are companies like Chevron, like Bank of America, like Disneyland. These are large multinational corporations that are making millions in profits and frankly can afford to pay their fair share. Next slide. So where does the money go? All counties will see a net increase in revenue. 40% of the revenue goes through K-12 and community colleges so that we can invest in our kids and we can help our youth, right? Our youth in community colleges prepare, and so that we're preparing our future nurses, our future firefighters, and our future teachers. Community colleges serve 2.5 million students per year and are the largest and provide the largest workforce training in the nation. It's time that we invest in them, and this measure will raise up to $506 million for community colleges across the state. 60% of the revenue goes to local governments, and that's divided between counties, cities, and special districts. As we all know, and as we have actually seen with this pandemic, local governments pay for critical services that we all depend on. They pay for affordable housing, they pay for libraries, for parks, for public health, and for health clinics. So this is critical revenue. All counties in the state of California will see a net increase in revenue. Next slide. So why now? So why should we do this now? Next slide. In California, we are facing a $54 billion deficit at the state level. Earlier this year, before the pandemic, we actually started with a budget surplus. But as a result of the pandemic, we're now facing a huge deficit at the statewide level. In addition to this, our local governments are just struggling. And they have been struggling since the passage of Proposition 13, which decimated funding for local governments and for our schools. For 42 years, we've seen disinvestment in our communities, and it has really left our economy in disarray. This is the only viable revenue solution in California. We didn't have a revenue solution that came out of the legislature. It all comes to this measure and to the ballot. This measure is key to California's recovery. Next slide. Our opposition. I wanted to talk a little bit about who our opposition is. Our opposition are organizations like the California Business Roundtable, it's CalTax, it's the California Chamber of Commerce, but our opposition really is not only these guys, it's the large corporations, right? It's the multinational corporations that are willing to do whatever they can to protect their profits. Our opposition has pledged to spend $100 million to defeat us, right? As Senator Leyva mentioned earlier, they're willing to do whatever they can to defeat this measure. They're willing to spread lies, and they're willing to use scare tactics that we're going after homeowners, that this will decimate small businesses. All of that is just frankly not true. Our opposition is represented and getting funded by large corporations like Blackstone, by Bank of America, and Chevron, large corporations that make billions of dollars. And they're frankly hiding behind small businesses simply to protect their profits. Next slide. So how are we going to do this? Given that we have such large opposition and well-funded opposition, what's our plan to win? Our plan to win is we want to expand our coalition and continue to build an undeniable movement. We have a statewide coalition that collected 1.7 million signatures to qualify this measure for the ballot. We want to continue to expand on that coalition, and we're going to need all of your help to do that. We'll also want to increase public support through large-scale public education. We want to expand the electorate with those people that are most impacted, and we want to raise the resources needed for a winning campaign. Next slide. So who is the coalition? We currently have a broad and powerful coalition with over 1,300,000 endorsers, and our number of endorsers are growing every day. We have members in the coalition like the League of Women Voters, like ACLU, Californians for Justice. We have support in rural areas and urban areas with hundreds of school boards, local elected officials that have endorsed CTA, SEIU. So we're seeing broad support on this measure. Next slide. More recently, we just got the endorsement from Governor Newsom. This was a huge victory for us to have the governor come out and pledge his support behind Schools and Communities First and Proposition 15. Next slide. It'll be critical. It'll be critical that we hold the support of our base voters. In our polling, we have seen that we're holding a consistent majority of support. We saw this in the recent PPIC poll. We also saw this in the recent Berkeley poll that came out today. We have strong support from people of color. We have strong support from young people, and we have strong support from renters. And it'll be critical, right, that we continue to hold this support going into the election. A United Way Los Angeles poll showed 63% support for the measure. The Latino Community Foundation August poll showed 76% support from Latino voters. So we have consistently seen a majority of support for this measure because voters are saying to us that they have had enough. Right now is the time to put our schools and our communities first, and they want to do this with Proposition 15. Next slide. So what is our secret weapon? Our secret weapon, frankly, is the field program. Our goal is to turn out 550,000 yes voters. We're going to do this by turning out unlikely voters, people that are infrequent voters. They usually tend to be young women, young people, women, immigrants, people of color. We have a statewide phone bank that we're doing every night. We're calling these voters every night. We're reminding them to vote. We're telling them about how they can vote, because in November, we all have the opportunity to vote by mail. But for those of you that need to vote in person, there are opportunities to vote in person. So we're doing education about how to vote, and we're making calls so that voters understand what will be on the ballot, and so that they're voting yes on Proposition 15. It'll also be critical that we reduce the down ballot drop-offs of supporters. So usually voters go and they'll vote for the presidential election, and they'll vote for elected officials or key statewide races, but they won't go down and vote on propositions. So we're providing that necessary education to ensure that we're reducing that down ballot drop-off. We also are increasing support and resiliency of our base. We're doing voter calls in 5 different languages to ensure that voters have the information they need. And we're using a vote by mail strategy. Usually GOTV is the final week of the election, but because ballots will be mailed in early October, the GOTV strategy starts when the ballots get mailed. And so that's why we're starting early, and we're calling voters every night so that they know about this issue. Next slide. So this is a fight. This is going to be a fight. I talked earlier about our opposition and the millions of dollars that they're willing to spend against us. And we know that we can't match them dollar for dollar. But what we have on our side is a people's movement, right? What we have on our side is the power of everyone coming together as a broad coalition to say enough is enough, and it's time to put our schools and communities first. This November is a critical election for our country and a critical election for our state. We will have to make a choice in California, whether or not we go down the path of austerity and cuts, or do we put bold plans together that put our schools and our communities first? This fight is not only about us, but it's also about our future generations. It's time to put an end to the 42 years of disinvestment in our communities. It's time to make a change here in California. And Proposition 15 gives us that opportunity to do that. And I'm asking you to vote yes on Proposition 15. Next slide. There are many ways to get involved. You can go to our yes15.org and sign up so that you're getting updates. If you have your cell phone and you take it out, you can text to 9779. You can text our future to 9779, and you will receive regular updates about the campaign and get information about how to get involved. You can follow us on social media, and I've listed here all the different social media handles. And more importantly, you can sign up to Phone Bank. We need your help. We need your energy. And we would love to have you come in and Phone Bank. We provide a short training and an opportunity to talk directly to voters about why schools and communities first is so important for you and for your community. So join us for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Veronica. Do you have time for some Q&A?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because that's what we plan. So I just wanted to make sure when you're working on a campaign, you never know what's going to happen, right? So we would, and those of you that are viewing this and participating, there's still time to put questions in the Q&A. So Veronica, if I might ask a couple of questions. So one is, and I've heard this quite a bit. Could you talk a little bit about how does Proposition 15 impact agriculture, if at all?
Sure, and thank you for asking me this question. There's been a lot of confusion about what the impact is on agriculture, and so I'm so happy that I have the opportunity to clarify this. Our measure is explicit. It explicitly states that agricultural land and property used for agricultural production is completely exempt, right? So this measure makes no changes to existing laws affecting the taxation or the preservation of agricultural land. In addition to that, we provide a huge tax benefit. I mentioned earlier that we're providing a big tax benefit to small businesses. And so that's for small businesses with 50 or less employees. But frankly, we provide a tax cut to all businesses. All businesses will receive the first $500,000 in a tax cut. Now, this is critical for family farmers. And we currently have the support from the California Association of Family Farmers, which is the biggest association of small family farmers in the state of California. And it's for all the benefits that our measure provides to their schools and to their communities, but it's also for this tax cut, because this tax cut on business equipment would allow family farmers will provide a huge exemption on their cost for tractors, ground irrigation systems. And so this is a critical exemption for small businesses that we provide across the state.
Thank you. Another question, there's a slide that you have about, sort of how the funds are distributed or where they go. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that in terms of where the funds go?
Sure. I mentioned earlier that about 40% of the revenue goes to education, and that's divided between K through 12 and community colleges. The funding for education actually includes an equity formula. So the money is put into a special fund and distributed across the state per the local control funding formula. And this is important for California, right? Because what this does is it ensures that the revenue is going to the neediest schools. The local control funding formula, mandates that schools with large percentages of children on the free lunch program, which is an indicator of poverty, in the ESL program or in foster care program, those schools will get additional funding. So all schools in the state of California will see additional revenue, but because the money is being distributed per the local control funding formula, we're going to see areas like the Central Valley, rural areas. This is going to be a huge gain for them. So it's not just for K through 12, but LCFF also applies to community colleges. And this is important when we think about how do we provide funding for children with the greatest needs. For way too long, right? California has underfunded education. We're currently ranked at 39th in per pupil funding. Not only that, we have the most crowded classrooms, and we rank at the bottom, right? For a number of counselors and librarians per student. And so it's time that we make a difference, and it's time that we reinvest in our children. So that was the education funding. The local government funding, I mentioned earlier, 60% of the money goes to local governments. That is split between counties, cities, and special districts. And as we know, counties pay for critical services that we all depend on, and it'll continue to do that. This money is collected locally and it stays locally. Right, this revenue is and many people don't realize that this revenue doesn't go to the state, right? It stays in our local communities. It's collected locally and stays locally.
So that's an important point. So thank you for putting on that. Another question, and I think everyone is always concerned about, transparency, accountability for the dollars, because people want to know, if I'm voting for Proposition 15 or any proposition, is the money going to actually go where it's intended to go? So could you just unpack a little bit more the accountability measures and the transparency measures of Proposition 15?
Yes, of course. And again, let me restate that the money is collected locally and it stays locally. But one of the important things about this measure as it relates to transparency is that it requires annual reporting of how the funds are distributed and spent, right? So that we can hold our local elected leaders accountable for how the revenue is spent. As I mentioned earlier, the funding for education goes into a special education fund, and that revenue is distributed across the state. And that money is actually, there's decisions, there's already a process in the LCFF funding formula, which is the LCAP funding process, right? Which brings together teachers, parents to make decisions about how the funding should be used for their schools. And so there's already a process in place. Local governments are subject to annual audits, right? And by our measure, they're required to public reporting about how the revenue is used.
So one of the questions in the Q&A is, will the legislature and the governor be able to divert Proposition 15 funds to Prop 98, or will these dollars be on top of Proposition 98?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So because the money is going into this special fund, this money is considered new revenue on top of Proposition 98. And we did that for a couple of reasons. We wanted to make sure that this was additional revenue, that it would not be used to backfill the Proposition 98 guarantee. And as you know, Proposition 98 requires a minimum guarantee of funding for schools in the state of California. But we wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to it wouldn't be used to backfill that guarantee that's required, right? So this is new revenue on top of Proposition 98. Now, there are, in California, we have passed previous statewide measures to ensure that Sacramento cannot take this funding from local governments. We've passed Proposition 1A and we've passed Proposition 22, which have protections in place to ensure that this money stays locally. Not only that, this measure is a constitutional amendment, right? And it explicitly states where the revenue will go, that the revenue will go to education and the revenue will go to local governments. This is language in this once it passes, this will be in the language in the state of constitution for California. And this is critical for people to understand that. There's just no way that this money would be diverted to Sacramento. This is money that is collected locally and it stays locally.
And again, I know that of the 40% going through to K-14 public institutions of education, of the 60%, the 11% will go to community colleges, just like the Prop 98 split. And the estimates are, I think you said, about $500 million for community colleges, which I think translates for those individuals who work at a community college, it's about a 4% COLA is another way to think about it. So what, Veronica, what would you say to the argument, here we are in a pandemic, we're in a massive recession, this is the worst possible time to increase taxes on any type of business?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier that we have a choice to make in California. We're facing a huge deficit at the state level, and we're facing local governments are just strapped for cash, right? This is the only revenue solution that is in place. Passing Proposition 15 is key to California's recovery. If we don't pass Proposition 15, then it's difficult to say what the future of California will be. This is critical for raising revenue in California because it all comes back to revenue. Local governments have played an important role in providing essential services, and now they're hurting, and the hurt from that is going to continue for years to come. So a couple of things as it relates to is now the right time. Now is definitely the right time because we need the revenue in California. The other thing to mention is that our measure includes a phase-in period. So the measure wouldn't be phased in for another 2 years, right? So in 2 years is when the first assessments begin of large commercial industrial properties. It's actually not until 2025 where we start to phase in commercial properties that have 50% or more small businesses. And so we have a longer phase in for those commercial properties that have tenants that are small businesses. But overall, this measure doesn't actually get phased in until 2022, 2023. And so that's important to remember, right? That it's not something that's going to happen, in January after we pass the measure in November. It's a measure that has a phase-in process in place. And again, this all comes back to what's the future of California? It's time for us to make things right in California. For too long, the children in our communities and our communities overall have suffered from disinvestment. In November, we have an opportunity to make things right. And we have to do this by supporting Proposition 15.
Yeah, those details that you mentioned, the phase-in, details, but important, easy to gloss over in the larger conversation about this.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, Larry, that California has one of the lowest property tax rates in the nation at 1%, and it's 2% when you consider inflation. Even after Proposition 15 passes, we will continue to have the lowest property tax rate in the nation because we're not changing the property tax rate. We're just saying that commercial industrial properties should be regularly reassessed, just like they do in almost every other state in the nation. And so we're saying, let's make things right. let's put California on par with other states in the nation that are regularly reassessing commercial industrial properties. And this is critical so that we could have revenue, right? We need this revenue for our schools and our communities.
Right, just it's using market rates is what, instead of using rates that perhaps 42 years ago, and maybe you've increased it 1%, but and to make the investment in the human capital, to use a term I don't really like, but without good public schools or colleges or institutions, you know, you could have low tax rates. We see some other states which have very low tax rates, but they don't necessarily have an economy that's doing very well. So we have about 1 minute or so left. So Veronica, anything else as we've been talking that you've been thinking of? How, you know, maybe just your closing pitch and what you'd like to say to voters, maybe who are on the fence or have heard that this is not a good idea.
Sure. You know, I talked earlier about the change that we have to make. This is about how do we continue to bring hope, right? How do we continue to hope for a better future? How do we ensure that our hopes and our dreams can come true on this issue by ensuring that our schools and our communities are fully funded? And this is a critical, important step to doing that. I grew up in the Coachella Valley, which is a very poor area. You know, I lived on a farm labor camp when I was little. My ticket to a better life was education, right? You know, coming from a farm worker family was tough. Going to a school with overcrowded classrooms, with not enough textbooks for everyone was tough. And my ticket to a better life was education. For all of you that are going to community college, you're going to community colleges because you're hoping for a better life. You're fighting for a better life. And for that, and so we're asking you to fight on this issue. We're asking you to get involved. We need your support. We need all of your support. We need your help in November, and it's our opportunity to lead the nation and make history here in California by passing Proposition 15.
Well, Veronica Carrizales, thank you so much. We appreciate all your work, and we appreciate your time and willingness to answer these questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Yes. So now it's my great pleasure to turn it over to Mr. Andrew Nichols. And Andrew serves, as you can see, as the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Student Senate for the California Community Colleges. He's a political science student studying at Folsom Lake College and UC Davis. Before getting involved in student governance, he was active in the community through the Boy Scouts, eventually attaining the Eagle Award. And once he started attending community college, he became the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Associated Students of Folsom Lake College before joining the Student Senate of the California Community Colleges. Andrew Nichols hopes to continue his work as a public servant in public policy after attaining a postgraduate degree. Thank you for being here, Andrew Nichols, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Larry, and thank you so much to the League for inviting us and including us on this webinar. I'm really excited to be here and share students. Within costs, basic needs, mental health funding, and so on and so forth. These things are critical to students because it supports a student's basic needs before it can easily academically. And funding for community college colleges to be able to supplement that funding.
Hey, Andrew, Larry.
Oh yeah.
So you're sort of coming in and out, which is a whole different policy issue about broadband that we need. So do you know, might you want to turn off your video, or is there a way that you might we want to hear you. So I don't know if there's something you might be able to do.
Yeah, for the sake of content, I'll just turn off my video and hopefully that improves things. Thanks, Larry. Sorry about that. So as I mentioned, the Student Senate has done a lot of work describing and norming what the basic needs issue really is for community college students. Although the cost of community colleges is low for students, it can cost $1,000 which tends to be more California. It's a huge issue that affects all community college students, and we come into this issue after the state has been facing a $54 billion deficit, as Veronica mentioned, in the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll share a story myself that before COVID-19 hit, I was a student worker at my community college district, and I was attending a board of trustees meeting. And during that meeting, the chancellor had assuaged the concerns of the public that we would try to remain open, that community colleges would continue to serve students. But then in a matter of days later, everything was shut down. That these opportunities that districts provide for students to get involved in, student worker opportunities, and other services that students rely on, all come from that local funding that community college districts have. And so if Proposition 15 were to supplement funding in absence of the funding as additional
Hey, Andrew. Andrew.
Yes.
You can hear me. So, you know what I'd like to do? Would you call back just via phone? And here's what I'll do. So we'll switch over to Andy Martinez and Jonathan Lightman, who can talk about some of the do's and don'ts. And then after you call in, we'll then get you back in so you can finish. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great. Thank you guys for the technical difficulties I'm having.
All right. Sorry about that. Thank you. All right. Thank you for your patience. So rural broadband and broadband throughout California is something that a first world nation should probably have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Andrew Martinez, who's the GR, the Government Relations Director at the League, and Jonathan Lightman, who is a consultant working with the League on government relations, who are going to talk about some of the laws and rules for public agencies and colleges. Gentlemen?
Thank you so much. We have a few slides to share with you about some ways that you can be engaged in participating, but recognizing your role as a community college. So Jonathan, I don't know if you want to add anything. We'll just move on to the next slide.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So really quickly, we want to make sure that you're aware that you have a right to share your voice and your position and your thoughts. But there are some restrictions and prohibitions that you should be aware of. So while we are overall going to give you some guidance and thoughts about how to proceed, we should be really clear with you that if you have any questions about specifically how you should behave, you should always follow up with your district council as well. Jonathan, I'll just pause there for a second.
Right. And so we have some basic guidance for you that, if you think about it, in fact, it's quite logical. Where the state government says that local governments resources and such cannot be used to advance an initiative or other type of campaign work, but there is absolutely activity that you are allowed to do.
So we'll move on to the next slide. So really quickly, we wanted to make sure that you're aware that the League's resources are available to you. And on our website, we have a 2020 election website, which is up there at the top, that ccleague.org/2020-election, where we have a lot of different pieces of information for you to use. But we also have in our next slide, a specific slide for Proposition 15, which has some toolkits that have been provided to us as well. We just want to make sure you're aware of that. These are the different materials that we have collected and just kind of placed in one place. So it's a little bit easier for you to find as you're shopping around for materials. I'm going to share it. The next slide as well is a sample resolution. If your board is considering taking a position on the initiative, we just wanted to make sure that you're aware of it. That we have a resolution that you could use to build something from as a foundation. And I'll pause here for Jonathan to add anything.
Yeah, I would say, as we've received a lot of questions in the chat about the mechanics through community colleges, how it will benefit community colleges, and there's information here in this resolution. It does, at some level, it pertains to the current budget crisis that we're in. I'd like all of us to think about this as a long-term solution, in the sense that it's not going to solve all of our problems, but it is going to infuse some extremely important revenues into our system. It will be divided between K-12 and community colleges on an 89-11 split. And the Chancellor's Office will have a role in the distribution of the funds. It is supplemental. It is not there to supplant. And what I could say, there's so many of you who answered the first question that we asked on the poll, which is, are you a veteran of the election process, or are you new to it? And the plurality of people who responded have a lot of experience with elections. And I'm going to guess that since you're on this town hall, that you also have tremendous experience in the community colleges. We've tried many different ways to supplement our funding through varying forms of state revenue. And for the most part, they've been unsuccessful. So as the campaign for Prop 15 said earlier, this is a once in a generation opportunity to look to the local side of the revenue to infuse our institutions with money that is so badly needed to advance student equity and student success.
So in addition to that, we have a couple of slides here on some do's and don'ts, just to make sure that you're aware of it. This is provided to us by our law firm that works with us. So we just want to really be clear that you can be actively engaged in a campaign as long as you are as a public employee. There are some restrictions, but you have a right to work on a campaign in certain periods. And you also have a right to wear materials as well, as long as you're not in the classroom instruction. So we want to be clear about that. And you can encourage people to vote as long as you're not trying to sway them one way or another as a public employee. And I'll just let Jonathan weigh in as well.
Yeah, think about it this way: when you're using the public resources as a community college, you are able to advance civic engagement and voter information. When you are actually in an advocacy role for or against a ballot initiative, or a candidate for that matter, that is on your own time, and you want to make sure that you're not only following the letter of the law, but also the spirit of the law.
And I think I have one more slide, which is just a quick things of things that you should be thoughtful of when you're thinking about engaging. Obviously, you don't want to ever use public resources with campaigning for an issue. These are just kind of the examples of some of those things, just so you're just really clear. These are on our website as well. On that election website, we have the two documents as well for trustees and for public employees. I'll hand it over to Jonathan and see if he has anything he'd like to add on. But I think, frankly, I'd like to make sure that we have enough time for Andrew to come back on as well.
Yeah, the law is very explicit in these areas. Even the question about the mail rooms. I mean, I know that this goes back maybe to a prior generation. We were doing more with snail mail, but we want to just be absolutely certain that public resources are not being used to advance a campaign. But once again, we are here to hopefully not frighten you, but to engage you and to motivate you. As the campaign mentioned, this stands a good chance of winning, but the final results won't be announced until after all the ballots are counted, and as a result, they need all the help they can in the campaign. And so however you can legally participate, we certainly encourage it.
So with that, I think I'll take a pause here and see if there's any questions for Jonathan or myself. If not, we'll see if Andrew's available for us to join back in.
I don't have an indication that Andrew is able to be back in, but if he is there, just chime in anytime, Andrew. But in the meantime, Jonathan or Andy, are you able to answer
Yeah. So Larry, out here it says Andrew is back. I would just offer that the voting, the polling on this suggests that it is really favored by people in their 20s and 30s. And that means that the more community college students that vote for this, the greater likelihood that this will prevail.
Thank you. So it sounds like
I think there was a question about virtual community meetings.
What's the question? Oh,
There was a question about virtual community meetings. I just wanted to see if Jonathan had anything that he wanted to.
I mean, in other words, if you are using public resources, for instance, let's say like Zoom, and you have the license for the Zoom is paid for by public funds, then you want to be careful. If it is privately funded, then it is absolutely appropriate. So you want to just take a look at everything from soup to nuts that public funds are not used to advance the campaign. And after that, with the very specific questions, we encourage you to engage your district council on this.
I think Andrew's back, so we'll take a pause here.
Yes, thank you, Andy. And once again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. I just really want to emphasize how important this is for students and the impact that it could have. As I mentioned before, districts are struggling to make up base funding, and as a result, I mean, other funding sources that are critical, such as the extended opportunity programs and services that go to support students, some of our most under-resourced students, are at risk in the next budget cycle. And by as early as 2022, Proposition 15 funds could start coming in to supplement base funding so that we could protect those critical programs which support our most under-resourced students. And so this increase of funding means so much for us. And we at the Student Senate are working with our students locally on getting out the vote and getting involved in the campaign and just being overall strong advocates for this, because we know it means a lot for our system. Thank you very much.
well, Andrew, thank you. You and your colleagues at the Student Senate for California Community Colleges are so inspiring to all of us, and you do just phenomenal work. And so thank you very much. And we appreciate that you made the effort to come back on despite the technical difficulties. So I want to thank Andy Martinez and Jonathan Lightman, my colleagues. And then also we have a bit more information just here at the final end of this virtual town hall. These are important dates, and some of you know we had the Secretary of State on a webinar in the not too recent past, who made, I think, a very important point, which is visible in the third bullet down, that instead of thinking about November 3rd as election day, it's really the final day of voting. Because of course, you will likely get your ballot several days before, and you have the opportunity, and that the final day for you to vote is November 3rd. Of course, everyone is being urged to vote early because we anticipate record turnout for this election. And we certainly hope that Andrew Nichols and the Student Senate and all the California Community College students will be participating. Finally, the Secretary of State's office is also creating a track your ballot option. And you know, it's quite simple. You just have to make sure that you know the proper name that you are using for your ballot, and you can track the status of your ballot to make certain that it gets in there. So, you know, I would say take advantage of that to make sure that your ballot gets in there. So with that, the Community College League of California wants to thank all of you for spending a little bit of your time today educating yourself and asking some really pointed, important, substantive questions about Proposition 15. We urge you to participate in any way, shape, or form that you can in this election. We are grateful to our guests, Senator Leyva, Ms. Veronica Carzales, Andrew Nichols, my colleagues, and I want to thank the League staff for all the tremendous work they do. And with that, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.